Well, hey everyone, I hope that you had a wonderful week and that you were able to enjoy a lot of things. Winter is still here in Minnesota. Ground is covered. Actually, the funny thing, as I'm recording this this Wednesday afternoon, whenever you're watching this, now you got, when I do it, is we got this winter storm watch warning going on, which, for some of you might cause big panic, but for Minnesota, it's par for the course. And it is normal for us out here. And so I hope that you are staying warm, staying safe as we endure the winter months. But once again, thank you so much for joining us online and being a part of our online discussion or online class that we have here going on at the church. There are two classes happening simultaneously online. We have our classes that meet here in person with our amazing teachers and staff here at the church, and they do a great job. And then because of our size, people also want to hear me teach, and so I present the online format for those who want something a little extra, or for those who are unable to make it to the church house on Wednesday nights. And so thank you for being a part of that. Like I said earlier, there are two online classes that kind of happen back to back. There's this one, which is our Battle Buddy series on the looking at the study of being an armor bearer, and that's kind of the foundational one. That's kind of the big one that we're promoting. But there's a second class that is, it's kind of every other couple of weeks. It's not every single week, and it's a little bit more exclusive to our website and our church app. It's not on YouTube. You will not find it here on YouTube if you're watching this from the YouTube channel. But in our church app and on our church website, we have a new series that we've started putting stuff into called Family Time. And it is a wonderful, very intimate feeling experience to sit down and just listen to me, just kind of share a little bit what's on my heart concerning the family and certain areas of where we can work together and build stronger families in our community and in our homes. And I hope that if you haven't been to the church website, if you haven't been to, haven't downloaded the app for our church, you can do that. It's Albert Lee Assembly of God is the app, and you can find that in the App Store on iTunes or in Google Play. Online, it's albertleeag.com. Just very simple, albertleeag.com, and there's a media tab on our website, and you can go and watch that video there. More coming on that class as the months go on, as we add to it. That's probably going to be going on for a while. It's not really a seasonal class, much like the others that we have going on, but I hope that you enjoy it. So once again, thank you for coming back for part 2 of our Battle Buddy series. Last week, we introduced the topic. We started talking about the armor bearer origin, or at least for the helper and that idea of the function of an armor bearer, and how it originated in Genesis chapter 2 with Adam and Eve and the creation of man and woman, and how she was a suitable helper for him. And it kind of gives you the foundational understanding of the armor bearer. And so now we're going to build upon that. We're going to just go further into the Word of God as we look at certain individuals and what can they show us about the armor bearer role, and why is that so important? And so it is really, really great thing. Now, while it is amazing and it is great having a special helper just for you, and we see that in looking in Genesis chapter 2 with the husband and wife, and having that special helper in your spouse, and how wonderful that is. It's important for us to note that depending on what task is set before you, what the job is needing to get done, that there is going to need and be a variety of armor bearers that will be needed to cover the various responsibilities and seasons of ministry. And so let me say it again. Dependent upon the task set before you, or the calling set before you, or the role that you find yourself in, there's going to be a variety of tasks, variety of responsibilities that need to be met, and therefore can determine a variety of armor bearers that will need to come in and help you to do those tasks, to run the organization, to do the work, and do it with excellence is a major major part and play on that. And so that is an important thing, and to have that there. Now we are going to look in Exodus. Okay, in the book of Exodus, Moses is called by God to lead the people out of a dire situation and into the will of God. Moses is called dramatically to go from one place and go into another in the book of Exodus, and we see that right off the bat. I mean, he goes from a Jewish infant that is placed into hiding by his mother, and finds his way into the royal palace. He grows up in the royal palace under the care of many, and then he goes. A situation happens in his life that causes him to flee the city, and so he flees and goes into the wilderness, and he starts a family there in the wilderness. And it was there in that wilderness place where the Lord calls to Moses and gives him a special job to go and take the people, and bring them into the will of God, or rather into the promises. They're always in the will of God. It's more of the promises of God. And throughout his leadership, with the various tasks that Moses would have to encounter, there's going to be different individuals that have to come alongside him to help him carry out what God has given him to do. Okay? So he's in this big, impossible task, and there's going to be several key armor bearers that are going to come alongside him to help him accomplish this task. Okay, first, for the leader, I want to point this out. For the leaders, we need to recognize the uniqueness of each responsibility. And what I mean by that is that each responsibility that we carry is completely unique. It's unique to the individual type of task that it is. It's unique to what city you find yourself in. It's unique to the shape of your building. You get the idea, is that the tasks set before you, while there could be a common parlance with them, but there is this really unique thing of each responsibility that we're going to be facing. And that's important. The other thing we have to also recognize, okay, we see the uniqueness of each responsibility because every single individual is completely separate, but that's the other part, is we have to see the individuality of each willing heart that has to come into play. So as leaders, we got to see each unique responsibility, and also recognize every willing individual that wants to help, and we have to see how their individuality and their own uniqueness apart from just the responsibility. And so when it comes to utilizing help, when it comes to recognizing the strengths, we need to see their strengths and their limits as those armor bearers, and we need to see what can we do, and how can we utilize those strengths to meet those needs. And that's important when it comes to, as leaders, recognizing team members and what is a team member's strength, what is a team member's weakness, what is a team member's limits, and and recognizing that field of the individual, and then taking it from there and saying, okay, now how can I help meet these individual responsibilities I'm faced with? I likened it this way. You will not put a square peg into a round hole. You want to find someone who's going to fit. And so you have to look at the individual responsibilities, the uniqueness of everything involved, and find that right person for the right job, kind of thing. Now, for the armor bearers, now this is important for those of us that are armor bearers to our leaders. We need to recognize the needs of our leaders and strive to meet these needs as best we can with a willing heart in whatever way we can. Now, this is it kind of coincides. So one, as leaders, we need to recognize the armor bearers and their giftings, their talents, their limitations, their own uniqueness as we consider what needs to be done and who we're working with. But as armor bearers, we also have to recognize as armor bearers the amount of work and the responsibilities that our leaders have and what needs have to be met, and then have a willingness. Now, I've seen this a couple of times where there is the need to get something done, and so you go to meet this need, but you do it in a reluctant mindset. You do it in a way that says, I'll if I have to, I'll do it. Oh, there's no one else. The greatest armor bearer heart you can have is one who does it willingly, and we'll coincide in this when it comes to Moses here in a little bit. But there's a willingness we can do to meet those needs best we can with a willingness, and in whatever way we can. It's about making their job less of a burden so that they can do it in excellence, and that's the role of an armor bearer. It says this: if they can't do their job, if they're having to meet a role that someone else is meant to, they cannot do their job if they're having to do someone else's job. That's really what it is. So how can I elaborate from that? The first armor bearer that Moses, for lack of a better word, we'll say receives. The first armor bearer that Moses receives is actually his brother Aaron. And you can read that in Exodus chapter 4. In Exodus chapter 4, God is calling Moses to go and lead the people out of Egypt and to lead them. He's given that invitation for leadership. Go, do. And in verses 15 and 16, God says, take your brother Aaron, take Aaron, go, and since you don't want to speak, I will give you the words, and then you can tell Aaron what to say, and he will speak for both of you. And that's in Exodus 4, 15 through 16. And so that's what happens. And so then later on in that same chapter in verse 28, God calls Aaron and says, go see your brother Moses. And so Aaron goes to see his brother Moses. Moses goes and sees Aaron. They partner up together. And this is the Pastor Ryan paraphrase, by the way. They partner together, what's up, buddy? And then they begin to work together for the glory of God. And Moses begins to tell Aaron what to say, and then Aaron goes around and says it. And, it's an important thing that's right to sit right in there. Okay. And so over the next 10 chapters in the book of Exodus, so from chapter 4 to chapter 14, it's Moses and Aaron. Moses and Aaron went before the people. Moses and Aaron went before Pharaoh. Moses and Aaron did these things. And it's this partnership that these two men shared. Okay. Moses would lead. All right. He would lead, he would direct, and he would decide and dictate. And Aaron would be his voice. He would be the one who would speak until Moses rose in his own confidence or rose in his own ability. Until Moses began speaking for himself, Aaron would be his voice. And so Moses would lead and help direct, and he would direct and lead and guide, and he would make the decisions, and Aaron would be his vocal piece. And that's what they did. And they did this for many years. Okay. But what's amazing about this armor bearer relationship between Moses and Aaron is that this camaraderie that these two men shared with each other, it got them through this all, and particularly Moses. Okay, the hard times of facing Pharaoh repeatedly. Okay, facing Pharaoh and facing the hard decisions that he was making, and to the denials that Pharaoh would give him. Moses going before Pharaoh was probably a mentally and emotionally challenging thing to do, because here he is, decades apart, entirely different individual, but yet this is somebody, if they're within age of each other, this is something that Moses probably grew up with. Okay, there was a relationship that these men had, and that they there was just from his formative years growing up in the palace, Moses had a relationship with this individual who is now Pharaoh, regardless of what that relationship must have been like. And yet, so here is this Pharaoh who's now, denying Moses and Aaron. And so these two men have to lean upon each other to accomplish this impossible task. And so just the turmoil of what this job alone takes. And so you have Moses, who is really leaning on Aaron to make it through, and these two men are leaning on each other. Okay. See, here's the thing: is that Moses laid out his limitations to God for the job. He laid out his limitations, and God supplied it. Now, this is the thing: I am slow of speech. I have an impediment. Whatever the excuse was, and he's like, "Look, I can't do this. I am slow in speech. I'm not eloquent. And what does it say? The Lord supplied. The Lord said, I will send Aaron who will speak for you. And so now, was Aaron perfect? Not by a long shot. He was not perfect. He has his, you can read through Exodus and through the Word of God, and you can find where Aaron made countless mistakes, but he was willing. He was willing to do it, and God used him, and the people were free, and God did a work through him. He was willing and able to do the work for the parts that Moses didn't care for. That's the hard part. Is like Aaron was willing and able to do the parts of the job that Moses felt unqualified for or felt unable to do. And so God supplied a helper to cover those shortcomings. And that's an important thing, okay? Now, this might seem a bit menial, okay? This might seem a bit off, but there are tasks that some leaders just either do not want to do not have the fortitude to do not have the knowledge to do, or even the time to do. There are certain tasks that certain leaders, or better yet, subjects, there's certain tasks that certain subjects, they can't accomplish. Whether it's a limitation on knowledge or a limitation on mind or strength or ability, time, whatever the case may be, there's a limitation where the leader can't put themselves out there for that. And so they have to lean on somebody, okay? They have to lean on somebody else in that regard. And so as armor bearers, here's the important thing. As armor bearers, we must cultivate a heart of a servant. We must cultivate that heart of a servant to come alongside the leaders and to fulfill those tasks that they're unable to, okay? Freeing them up for something else. Cultivating that servant heart and says, whatever the leader needs, I'll get it done. That servant heart, that mentality of whatever task they can't get to, I will. Whatever task needs to be done, I'll do my best to get that done for them. And there's a delegation that involves, and we'll get more on that here in a little bit, but there's something more. See, the heart of an armor bearer exemplifies that servant heart, okay? It's this line, how can I lift his hands? All right, there's a passage in the scriptures where the Israelites are going to war, and Joshua, who we'll talk about in a moment, Joshua is leading these Israelites on the battlefield as Moses and two others, Aaron and Hur, are on top of this mountain. And every time that Moses has his hands raised, the Israelites are being victorious. And when his hands lower, they begin to falter. And so Moses is doing his best to keep his hands up so that they are victorious in battle. Aaron and Hur notice this. And then as Moses' hands get tired, they hold up their leader's hands. They hold up his hands so that the nation is victorious. Okay, this is the heart of a servant. It's, what can I do? I can hold up my leader's hands. And so that is the role. And that's the role that Aaron took, is how can I hold up his hands? And that's an important role for an armor bearer. An armor bearer comes alongside and says, what can I do to support you? What can I do to help you? What jobs do you need me to do? And then having a willingness to go and actually do those things. Okay? And so that is an important thing. The second, armor bearers. Okay, we looked at the first one. We considered Aaron. And the second one I want us to consider, and I'm giving it the plural, the second armor bearers to Moses are these delegated leaders of Israel. Okay, these delegated leaders of Israel. In Exodus chapter 18, Moses' father-in-law Jethro comes to visit. He comes with Moses' family. He comes to bring the family together, and he comes to see Moses as Moses is leading the people of Israel. And as Jethro is watching Moses lead, he notices something. Moses is handling all of the work by himself. Okay, now the people of Israel are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people. I mean, this is the town. This is the size of a town. Okay, it's not just like, yes, there's my neighborhood. No, it is a nation of people who are following Moses in the wilderness, and Moses alone is doing all this work. And so you can already kind of see this weight upon the leader as he's having to handle every little disagreement. He is handling every little bit of being a judge. And so Jethro is watching his son-in-law having to basically judge silly things and big things, doing all this work, and from sun up to sundown, this is all that Moses has to do. And Jethro sees this, and he tells Moses, he goes, what will help you is if you delegate. So Moses takes his father-in-law's advice and chooses several qualified men. You can read about it in Exodus 18. Moses chooses several qualified men. Now, we're not told their number initially, but in Exodus 24, when God's renewing the covenant with the people of Israel, he's making this covenant with them. He calls Moses, Aaron, other leaders, and then he says the 70 elders. So, in my opinion, these are 70 elders that Moses chose. Moses chose 70 qualified men who are able to help him lead the people of Israel. He's 70 qualified individuals to do this task. All right, this task of taking care of leading the organization was wearing Moses out and taxing him and those around him. And so he sees these individuals, and so he chose qualified men, he endorsed them, and then he enables them to serve with authority. So he gives them command. He goes, you're going to be in charge of that group of people. You're going to be in charge of that group of people and that group of people. And so he begins to delegate his authority and says, all right, go. I want you to go and to minister. I want you to go to judge. I want you to effectively govern that group. And so these individuals with Moses' authority go out and govern so that Moses can focus on the much more important things. Now, these 70, they still report to Moses. Moses is still their leader. And then the big cases, the big disagreements, the weightier subjects are still taken to Moses. But he's not having to do all these tiny little things anymore. He's not having to do these tiny little disagreements, these silly little spats. He's not having to handle them anymore. He's delegated these things off so that other people can do them. And it frees up his time. It allows him to focus on, his other important tasks that were there before him. And so, it's an important thing. There's only so much that work that the leader can do. Okay, when it comes to leadership, particularly in churches and in ministries, it can seem like the expectation is that the leader has to do it all. If you're the youth pastor, you do everything for the youth. If it's the senior pastor, you do everything for the entire building. It's like almost this big expectation that, well, I'm not on staff, so I'm not going to do. Well, the problem with that is that there's going to be things that begin to slip up. All right. And so this is where delegation is a big play, because in order for everything to work in excellence, there are things that have to be delegated to those who are qualified and able. And they take these delegations and they're able to share the load and to share the burden. And then if there's possibilities, they can delegate the other works even further. But it's to free up those in leadership so that they can focus on the much more important tasks. Okay. In the book of Acts, we see a situation arise in the New Testament there in the book of Acts where the ministry was starting to demand so much of the disciples' time. They were getting exhausted and were ministry mistakes were beginning to happen. And so they said to themselves, this is in Acts chapter 6, let us therefore choose qualified men from among us who can do the work of the ministry. And so the 12 chose, the disciples, they chose other men, other individuals who could then do other parts of the work so that they can devote themselves to the more important things. What did the disciples do? They devoted themselves to the leading of the church, the teaching of the ministry, and to prayer. The ministry of the word and prayer. They said, this is so much more important for us to devote our attention here than it is to sit there and do all these little tasks. So if the ministry is going to be successful, if these things are going to be taken care of, let's choose qualified individuals to do this job for us. And so that's what they do. They took the work, and instead of being exhausted and being a terrible leader, they decide, well, let me delegate it up to another one. So they choose that armor bearer and they say, hey, can you handle this task for me? All right. See, because good leaders good leaders need to recognize their limits and to look for willing armor bearers to cover the countless tasks that are going to rise before them. Yeah, that's that. I mean, that's a good leader is going to look for an armor bearer to cover the tasks that they can't get to. And so that's an important, a very important and vital part of ministry right there. Now, one final armor bearer I want to bring up is for Moses. The final armor bearer that we're going to look at is found in the individual of Joshua. Excuse me, the individual of Joshua. I almost said another name, and that would have been wrong. Throughout their years in the wilderness, okay, as the Israelites are going around in the wilderness, they arrive at the promised land. Moses sends out 12 spies, and of the 12 spies, 10 sway the heart of the people. 10 spies say, this is a mistake, these guys are giants, we're not going to make it. And only 2 said, no, we can do this, God's given us this land. But because of the words of the 10, all of the people of Israel were against it. No, this is not going to work. This is a mistake. And so because they refused to enter when they should have, God caused them to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. Okay. And so Joshua was one of those spies. See, throughout their years, Joshua would help Moses in whatever task Moses needed to get done. He served as a spy. He was one of the 12 spies that went in. He also served as a general. He was one of the leaders of the armies when Israel was wandering in the wilderness and they had to face enemy nations. He was one of the leaders. He was one of the commanders. Okay, he was a servant. He was a man who just came and waited on whatever Moses needed. And then he would also go on to become a leader. In Deuteronomy chapter 31, we see that Joshua has arisen to this place. Moses is getting ready to pass away. He's in his twilight season as the leader of Israel. He has done all that he could. He's led them best he can, and now it's time for the next generation to be led by someone. And so Moses calls Joshua to him. He calls this man who has walked with him for 40 years or more and has journeyed with him throughout all the wilderness, who has served him as a spy, as a general, as a leader, as a servant. And this man who's willingly served him and waited on him and helped him meet his needs. The Lord, Moses chooses this, and he goes up, and in Deuteronomy 31, it says that Moses took Joshua and commanded him and gave him instructions and told him, do not be afraid. The Lord will go before you. And he basically, in that place, anoints Joshua in his stead. Moses knew, he understood his limitations. He understood that his time as leader was up, and now it was time for the next person to rise up. It was time for the next person to take over that role of leader. And so part of his role as an armor bearer to Moses is that Joshua would be trained. He would be trained by Moses. His heart would be trained. His faith would be trained. His mind would be trained. He would be instructed by this man, Moses, who saw the face of God and heard the voice of God and led the people of Israel in some of the most exciting Old Testament passages. And Joshua would be trained by this man to be the next leader. And so when Moses is now time to step away, Joshua is ready to fulfill that role. Why? Because he has walked in whatever capacity his leader needed. Now he's ready to be that next leader. He stood by Moses even when the crowds did not respond. He displayed a loyalty to his leader that when he was a spy, those 40 years prior, he was a spy in that moment, and the people's hearts were swayed against Moses. They did not want it, and he stood by him. He stood by his leader. He displayed a loyalty that's going to be a topic for another episode altogether, so you'll have to wait on that. But there was this amazing display of that humbleness to do whatever the leader needed to serve Moses. And then as time would go on, Joshua would rise up to be that leader. It kind of goes against a little backwards. I think sometimes we can be so filled with our ambition. We have this ambition to be the person in charge. Well, I'm not going to do anything until I'm in leadership. Oh, I'm not going to stand behind somebody. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. As an armor bearer, as a servant, what's important for us to understand, and I think sometimes I've seen so many examples of this missed, and I really want to hit this hard. we can be so ambitious that we miss the heart of a servant. And when it comes to pastoral leadership, we are servants by our very virtue of our office. We are not servants, we are servants under the Lord, and we have to have that guiding principles from God and that humility that we must display before the Lord. But ambition can take us where we can advance. We want to push forward and think, well, I'm ready for this job, or I'm ready for this position, and they're just hindering me. And you go outside of God's structure out of ambition. You consider some of the kings of Israel who, while their father is king and in office, the son would go and would begin to turn the hearts of the people away from his father, so that they would be united to him. And just that coup d'etat kind of experience that occurs right there, because there's a lack of that submissiveness, that submitting to the pastor, submitting to that spiritual authority, submitting to that servant is so vital. That armor bearer mentality is so important to the church, because it actually will give the church greater success. So if your leader is doing unbiblical things, that's different. Hold the accountability there. But if they're walking in humility, if they're walking in Scripture, and they're displaying the characteristics that God so desires in his leaders, then praise God for that. Stand behind them, encourage them, and let the Lord raise you up in due time. In due time. Until it is your time, serve your leader to the best of your ability. Be that armor bearer. Come alongside them and meet the needs that express themselves, and do so with a willingness and an excellence and a humility. And then when it is your time to shine, you'll get there. But it's this idea of being that submission to who is your leader, who is the person that you're underneath, and walking with the Lord, instead of always striving for that ambition, because that can be a mistake, and you buck the authority that God has placed over us, and we need to be careful that we don't do that. As armor bearers, our job is not to sit there and become that ambitious leader. As armor bearers, the job is to be that servant, to come alongside and to help them meet the needs. And so that was all gold for you. And so we need to see that a good armor bearer will create such an atmosphere that when the leader has to step away, the leader does not worry about a thing, because he knows that the armor bearer has it all covered. Say, a good armor bearer will handle the task set before them with excellence and diligence, so that when the leader steps away, when the leader has to step away, whether it's permanently, whether it's for a season, whatever the case, that when the leader has to step away, he knows everything's going to be handled. Why? Because he's got a qualified armor bearer right there doing the task. And Moses was able to be the leader he was for the people of Israel. Why? Because, one, he had somebody who was to be that comrade, that companion, stood beside him whenever things got difficult. He had delegated his authority to those who needed to govern the smaller projects. And he also had Joshua, who he had an individual who he could lean upon and train up to take that place next, to be that servant who would just wait on him. That is the importance of having that armor bearer role. And so thank you so much for indulging this discussion as we talked about this role of armor bearer. I hope that you are gleaning a lot from it, that you're really enjoying it. The benefit, again, of this medium, of having it online on YouTube and the church app and on the website, is that you can find this again and you can review it as many times as you like. And so I appreciate that. If you are enjoying these videos, press the like button, subscribe, comment, and we would love to connect. Thank you so much. If you are in the area in southern Minnesota, we would love to have you join us in person. We have our Sunday morning worship at 10 a.m. with the discipleship class at 9 o'clock the hour before. And so again, worship is at 10 on Sunday mornings. We have a prayer service at 6 p.m. that you will not want to miss if you are here. And then also our midweek service is on Wednesday nights at 6:30 is our classes. And we would love to have you come and to participate in these events. And they happen every single week. And, you know, weather permitting, if it's not too stormy here in the winter. And but we are so thankful for you. We appreciate it so much. If you can only catch it online, that is wonderful. We live stream our Sunday morning worship at 10 o'clock. We're always doing our best to make subtle improvements as best we can with that program. So that live stream is 10 o'clock on Sundays. And then our midweek is released every Thursday morning at 7 a.m. And thank you so much for your participation. If you'd like to give towards the ministry, if you'd like to give towards our capabilities with our technical advancement with our churches and our online and the stuff that's going on here, there's a giving link in the description below. You can click that link and you can just give as your heart leads. And also you can just mail it to the church. Thank you so much for your participation in this video today. God bless you. May his face shine upon you. And we will see you next time. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.